I don't know what happened. Hello, everybody. We are just about ready to get started. You can hear me now. How about now? And now, and now. Yes, we're going to get started soon. We're just making sure that our technical things are arranged right, and we'll get ready to go. This is a webinar that's going to encompass a lot of different information, and also it's for people who are first-timers just getting started, and it could be for people who are a little more advanced as well. So really for anyone. We're talking about getting started, we're talking about self-publishing, etc. We're also going to put up on the side a PDF cheat sheet that you're going to be able to download. So keep an eye out for that later. I'll try to give you a heads up for it when we are ready to go. And as you can see behind me, look at all these books. We are officially in the Blurb compound, the Blurb office. A lot of these books behind me are some of my favorite books that have come through Blurb in the recent past. But anyway, we'll talk about a lot of those, and we'll see some examples and talk about a million different things. And also, make sure that you write in your questions. We have questions that people have written in already prior, but I'm hoping that some of the things that we go over are going to jar some things loose, and you're going to be able to write in with some questions. This is really what we want here, is a two-way street. We want you to hear some things or ask the things that you think are pertinent to what stage you're at. What are the things that are hanging you up and getting your books done? So there's a lot of things that can snag us and hold us up, but hopefully we're going to work through some of those today. And how we looking? The masses are all converging on our webinar. You can just feel the entire internet being slowly sucked towards the Blurb office. We've increased power here. We have generators running in the background just to handle the overflow. So I think we're okay. We've got plan A, B, C, and I think a D plan in there as well, but it's pretty sketchy. So I'm hoping we don't have to get that far back. All right. I'm going to start sharing. I think I'm going to visibly disappear here, but hopefully my presentation will start. Share. I'm going to turn this off. Is it good? Are we good here? My computer seems to be in quicksand, but anyway, okay, so let me just double check this. You guys you can't see me, but you can hear me, and you can see my presentation. Okay, right on. So I want to first of all thank everybody for taking time to come here. I know that we are all insanely busy. That's just the way that life is today. But I appreciate you taking the time to come here. Publishing, putting books out into the world is a complex but extremely satisfying endeavor. And I've been doing this a long, long time. I've made over 220 some odd publications. Not all of them are good. There are plenty that were experimental, that were particularly not particularly great publications, but I always learned something from all of them. I also want to thank the Blurb staff that's here helping behind the scenes, Kayla, Amber, and Esty. They're the super team, really. They're the logistics and nuts and bolts. I'm like the anchor man who just, reads off a teleprompter, basically. So they're the ones that deserve the credit. But we are going to talk about a bunch of things, getting started, self-publishing, and let's dive in. This is who I am, basically. I'm a creative evangelist. Not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds cool, and I'm happy with that title. But before we start on the full presentation, I was sitting in my hotel room this morning, and there were three things that I couldn't stop thinking about, which I think are incredibly important for anybody who is thinking about going down this publishing road. Number one is this is supposed to be fun. And this just happened to me a couple of days ago again. I got a call from someone who was making their first book, and there was this overwhelming sense of kind of pressure and foreboding atmosphere of, I've never done this before, I have to make a book, and it has to be perfect. And I think that that's a really unfair position to put yourself in, because this is, again, supposed to be fun. We're rapidly approaching tax season, so we all know what not fun things are. Bookmaking should be really fun. And there's a couple of tricks that I'll talk about later that I think can really help you always ensure that the fun is there. Number two, build for the system. So whether you're going to use Blurb, or you ultimately use Blurb and then you ultimately use someone else, or you're experimenting and testing companies, it's tough when someone comes to me and says, hey, if Blurb had X, Y, and Z, then I would publish with Blurb. And I think that's a really tricky place to put yourself in. I think the smarter thing to do is look at what the particular platform offers and build specifically to those tools. So if you look at the paper types and say, okay, I've got a 60 pound and a 70 pound, just choose one and do that. Don't wait for the 65 pound paper to emerge. And number 3, this goes to everybody out there listening, is don't be afraid to make a test book. Test books are like a release valve. They take all the pressure off. You can print small samples of your book, a 20-page softcover, inexpensive, and sort of break the ice of making that first book instead of trying to make the perfect War and Peace style book right out of the gate. I think that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So those were the 3 things I wanted to get off my chest. And let's move on to the actual presentation. Sound good? Good. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about for getting started is printing your work. Now, we all live in the digital age. Most of us are working with digital cameras. We have iPads and iPhones and laptops and towers and everything else, and we're very accustomed to throwing work around in the digital space, and that's all fine and dandy. But there is a big difference between printing and showing your work digitally. And printing, and I'm talking about even making a single print, like a postcard or a single 4x6 print. What printing does that is so magical is it forces you to put critical thought towards your work, whether you're an illustrator, a photographer, whatever it is, whatever kind of book you're making. If you start making small prints, what it forces you to do is say, what are my best images? Because why would you want to print something that's not great? Why would you want to pay for that print? Sometimes when you're making a book, it can seem very daunting and complicated because you've got all the pages and the cover and papers and all these things. Whereas making a single print, I always sort of refer to this as a gateway. Printing is a gateway towards making books. And what I'm showing you right now is a sample. These are 4x6 postcards of my images from various places, Peru, Panama, Mexico, Los Angeles, etc. And these were all printed on my home printer. They're using a paper that's made by a company called Hahnemühle, and Hahnemühle actually makes these little silver tins that are postcard paper. And as you can see, they have rounded edges like the old postcards. The printer I'm using is not particularly good. It's a cheap all-in-one printer, but these look beautiful. And then I actually mail these out to people, believe it or not. In 2018, I'm still sending postcards. But I love it, and I hope you'll send me postcards in the future. But anyway, these are inexpensive, super fun, super easy, and once you start printing these, lo and behold, you're going to start edging your way towards books. Now, I also make larger prints. These are about 11 by 14, and this was a portfolio that I made back when I was photographing children commercially. And I was always making small prints, but then I decided, you know what, big prints are pretty cool too. So this is what I would call a medium-sized portfolio. And again, when you go up in print size, you actually put more and more thought into the images, I think, the further you go up in scale, because you're spending more money and they're bigger. And when you put one in front of someone, you really want to make an impact. So again, I think these are just like little gateways into helping you get your mind around bookmaking. These, to go one step even further, these are like 20 by 20 prints. These are pretty ginormous in the grand scheme of things, although today we see photographs that are far larger than these. But if you print a 20 by 20 print, it's a serious endeavor. I mean, the printer that you're making it on looks like a spaceship. It's so large. But again, I make a lot of books because I'm constantly printing small, medium, large prints, and these are in turn forcing me to put critical thought towards the work. What's the best image? What images work well together? What's the sequence going to be, etc. So that when I come to the book, I've already got the printing experience under my belt. We're going to move on to the next little section. But before we do, I just want to remind people that you can send your questions in as we're going. And I'm going to stop at the beginning of each segment, and I'm going to ask if there's any particularly juicy questions coming in. So I'm going to test this out right now just to see if there are any juicy questions coming in. Do we have anything live streaming, any questions that we want to?
Someone asked the name of the paper brand.
Someone asked the name of the paper brand that I was talking about. It's called Hahnemühle, and I'm not even sure exactly how you pronounce it. I want to say it's a German company, Hahnemühle paper, and they come in little postcard tins, which is what I was referring to. But there's a lot of great papers out there that you can choose from. Esty, do we have one more question? No? Okay, so I'm going to go on here, and I'm going to talk about why Blurb works for self-publishing. And this is kind of Blurb's story, but it's also my story as to why I think this works. So there's a bunch of things here why it works. One, freedom to create the book you desire. One of the things I see happening a lot is photographers especially. I'm going to talk a lot today about photography because that's the background that I have and where I come from, and I was a photographer for many years. A lot of times people come to me after they've shopped their book around at publishers. And one of the realizations they come to is that when you do a book with a publisher, oftentimes it becomes their book in addition to it becoming your book. And their vision of that book might be very different from your vision. So sometimes photographers will actually get a book published, but then they're not particularly happy with the design, with the book, the ultimate book that resulted from the collaboration. When you do a book on your own, when you do a book with Blurb, it looks exactly like the book that you want. So if you see your book as a monograph that's showcasing your photography, and the publisher sees it as a point of purchase book and small format softcover, you might be on opposing sides of the page here. Whereas if you do a book with Blurb or an independent platform, you can make the specific book you want. Number two, you're not stuck with a single format. So if you look at Blurb's offering, you have photo books, trade books, magazines, etc. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing a book, a hardcover photography book, and then doing a magazine version of it at the same time at a different price point that sort of shows the same project from a different angle. And one of the case studies I show later, a book called The Lost Rolls and Magazine, will highlight exactly what I'm talking about here. Number three, you have distribution options via Blurb. So you have the Blurb bookstore, which is ultimately why I started using Blurb in the first time way back in the day. 2007, I started using Blurb. And the reason was really the bookstore more than anything else. I had a direct relationship with my clients who could go straight to the Blurb bookstore without getting me involved, and they could order their book and have the book shipped directly to them. Fast forward to today, and Blurb also has relationships with Amazon and Ingram, which also gives you a much, much, much broader distribution base for your book. Distribution is a complicated scenario. There's no two ways about it, but we do offer some really good solutions for that. Number four, the beloved ISBN number. I love running into people who are obsessed with ISBN. It's kind of a strange thing to be obsessed about, but I love it nonetheless. We provide ISBN numbers for free. You can also provide your own ISBN numbers if for whatever reason you choose to do so. A lot of the publications that I do don't require them, but if I need them, they're there. Number five, marketing tools. Marketing and distribution, if I had to choose two of the trickiest things to solve as a self-publishing person, those would be two at the top of the list. But Blurb gives you marketing tools, and they work well in complement with many of the other marketing tools that you have at your disposal, just living in the digital world today with the internet and blogs and newsletters and things like that. And so they're there as well, which is another reason why Blurb works well as a self-pub platform. And number six, and perhaps most importantly, it is really fun. And this was the first thing I told you about today. Again, you gotta keep it fun, and it's addictive. So when you make your first book, doesn't matter if it's a big book, small book, expensive book, inexpensive book, when it arrives on your doorstep, it is a very, very cool thing to open the door and see your work in print. I'm just warning you that, and I know there are people on this call who are as hooked on this process as I am, and they have reflected the same thing to me, that it's pretty great. It never gets old, in other words. Okay, moving on here. This is the major themes that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about themes of the work. I'm going to talk about purposes, why you would self-publish a book, why would you get started in putting something into the world like that. I want to talk about formats. I'm going to talk about layouts, tools, because you've got a lot, timelines, and then budgets, keeping budgets in mind, and also getting your book in a store. Like, how cool would that be, but how tricky is that? We're going to talk about all these. I'm going to move on and start with the first one, theme, but before I do, I'm going to start and see if there's any intriguing questions out there. Anyone? Any questions? What's the fastest land animal? Where's the best place to park? I can answer any of those. Don't even limit it to books, just life lessons. Anything, or I'd move on. All right, we're going to move on to theme. You guys are holding out on me. Get these questions going. All right, theme. So when I say theme, I'm talking about the general look of that book, of not only the work, but actually the book itself. And the easiest way for me to say this is that your content is going to dictate the theme. So let me give you an example. Way back in the day, believe it or not, this was my portfolio. So this was pre-book, this was pre-magazines, this was pre-print on demand. As a photographer, you had slides of your work, and you shipped off pages like this to editors. And believe it or not, editors would hold this up to a desk lamp and determine whether or not they wanted to give you an assignment, and you would become famous, or you would forever be left behind by the tide of history. So this is a book, a project on Sicily. And it was all shot black and white, 35 millimeter. It was a 5-year project. It was what I would call dark, contrasty, grainy kind of work. So I want to show you a couple of examples of that. Here's one photograph. Here's another photograph. Again, this is what I would call reportage photography, real world events. I would probably call this maybe gritty, again, contrasty, dark, grainy. So imagine the book that this would land in, okay? And now let me show you another kind of image. At the same time that I was doing this work, I was also doing this work, which was photographing, doing portraiture of children that I would then license commercially for various applications around the world. So I was shooting pictures like this. And by the way, this little girl and this little boy are now in high school. So that's kind of scary. It is dating me a little bit here. But look at this image here. Look at the color, look at the light, look at the palette, look at the fact that I'm using color photography and not black and white, and then compare it to something like this. These two books are not going to look the same. The paper type, the trim size, the cover type, the design, the use of typography, the use of color, the use of scale, all of these will vary depending on what the content of that work is. And I want to give you an example of something that you could do outside of this webinar, outside of this platform, to sort of educate yourself about how content will dictate what a book's look like. And that is to look at various publishing houses. And I'm going to give you two in particular, two publishing houses that will show you exactly what I'm talking about. The first one is called Trolley Books, and they're based in the UK. And Trolley does a lot of books that are reportage. You know, they're really serious, documentary, social issue books. Fantastic publisher. Look at Trolley, and then the second publisher to look at is called J&L, and they're based in New York. I think they're in Brooklyn. And J&L is also a wonderful publisher. But if you look at the books that they do, you will see very, very drastic differences between the catalog at Trolley and the catalog at J&L. One is light and bright and airy and colorful. When you look at a J&L catalog, you'll see oranges and yellows and reds. And when you look at Trolley, you're going to see a lot of neutral colors, a lot of grays, a lot of blacks, a lot of whites, etc. And what I'm getting to here is that the content is matched, is dictating the trim, form, size, color, shape of those books. And I think that's the easiest way to start. And I just want to share here again the importance of looking at other books, of going to publishing houses, of going to bookstores, going to the illustrated section, and just getting your eyeballs on as many as possible to see what people are doing. Okay, we're moving on from theme. We're going to purpose. Why on earth would you make a decision to put a book into the world? This actually, I want to say, this actual photograph was at the Aperture Foundation. Sort of back behind the scenes at Aperture in New York, which is an amazing place and one of the first places, especially if you live in New York, first place to visit. Okay, range of purposes why you would put a book into the world. Number one is a portfolio. There's a big difference between a portfolio and a book. A portfolio is a sample of your greatest work. It may or may not tell a story. It's just, hey, this is who I am as a writer, an artist, an illustrator, whoever, and I need a portfolio to get work. That's a great reason to put a book out. You may have business collateral, and I'm sure some of you on this call have heard the expression, the book is the new business card. I remember in the day when I started in photography, having a business card was a big deal. Now when I go into events in the public and nobody has a card, everybody has their iPhone. But business collateral books, meaning leave behinds, portfolios, pamphlets, flyers, etc., another great reason to put your work out there. Number three, the beloved monograph. And if there are any photographers on this call, hopefully there are, you will know the power that the monograph has on the mind of the artist. Still to this day in the digital age, the monograph, and a monograph is what I would call a career retrospective book. The monograph is still considered the feather in the cap for anybody out there who's working as a photographer. So you may get your work in magazines, you may get commercial shoots, but having a book of your work is still considered the ultimate statement of being accepted as a high-class artist or a successful, talented artist. Number four, exhibition catalog. If anybody's doing exhibitions, you're having shows, you'll know that oftentimes there is a catalog that corresponds with that show. Sometimes those catalogs are sold and they actually sell really, really well. Even if there's a book of the work, the gallery will create a catalog that coincides with that particular show at that particular time. And a catalog has its own set of design parameters and looks and feels. But very important and very fun to make. If you go into most galleries, you'll see a whole collection of these. Okay, another reason could be a social cause. Let's say that you are working for, you're a photographer and you've gone on assignment for an NGO or a non-governmental organization, and you're in northern Uganda photographing, and the NGO needs something, a print piece that goes out into the world to show what the success of their operations in the field. This is a perfect thing. I put this in here because I've done this in the past, this exact thing. I've done work for NGOs in the past and then made print pieces for them that they could use actually for business collateral, portfolio, etc. And finally, and I think this is where most everyone on this call fits in, is you are somebody with a story to tell, and that's really all you need. You don't need any other reason than that. And your story could be incredibly personal. It could be, my mother just turned 80 a couple of days ago. I could do a book about my mom turning 80. Does that have a mass audience? I have no idea. My mom probably thinks it does, but this could be all the reason you need to get your book into the world. And I think every single person on this call, I know that every single person does have something to say and has a good story in them, probably way more than one. Okay, moving on again. I want to show you a little example here. Whoops, I'm sorry, go through this again. Sicily, I just want to give you an example of some of these. So this is a catalog that I did. This was one of the first books I ever made for Blurb. This was back in 2007. And again, I'm showing you that same group of work from Sicily, which I have not worked on for years and years, but I still like the work. And the Sicily book was, I was approached by 2 traditional publishers to do a book of this work, and I declined to do that because it was just not the thing I wanted to do at the time. So I just quickly made this Blurb catalog, and lo and behold, this book began to sell. Really, it was a very simple design, as you can see, basically just a single image on a page with a number beneath it, and the number corresponded in the back to where the image was made, the title, the year, etc. And this was what I considered an exhibition catalog. There were prints that corresponded with this, but I just put this book together very quickly just to give you a sample of what, like, one of these reasons to put a book into the world. Next, we are moving on to the formats part of this presentation. Any questions? We want to test the water with a question.
Yes, there is.
What's my favorite format? We could even start there, or we just go on. What's my favorite format? I don't have a favorite format. See, it was a trick question. I got you. You thought I was going to give you an answer to this, but I'm not, because I've already said that the content of the work will dictate the format. But if I had to choose one, I would not be able to. I've made so many photo books and magazines, and I'll show you a magazine that I'm working on now a little bit later. I love all of these formats. Just because a book is giant and shiny doesn't necessarily make it better. You have to be very strategic about who your audience is, what they'll pay, what they want, etc. So let's move on, because we got a million things to talk about. Let's talk about formats. And the first one, the most obvious, is the photo book. I think there's probably a lot of people on this call who are photography lovers. The photo book, if you think about photo books, think about hardcover, think about fine art paper, large in size, more expensive, but this is sort of the classic coffee table book. There are a million applications for this. Back in 1988, when I started photography, I did not have this option. There were none of these options available, but man, did I want one of these. And in 2018, the same thing is true. I think the photo book is sort of, most of us are after. You also have trade books, and this is where things get really fun. A trade book is a global standardized size, and these are 5x8, 6x9, 8x10. And I'm going to hit you with that make a test book advice that I gave you early on in this presentation again, because if you've never made a trade book and you're coming from the classic photo book tradition, the must that you have to do is you have to just make a trade book sample. And this is not going to cost you a lot of money. They're affordable. They work really well as a companion to a photo book. They're smaller, they're less expensive, the materials are different. They are very strategic tools. So imagine this, imagine doing a hardcover photo book, and it's expensive, but it's the book you've always wanted, and you make that. Well, I think a lot of people that follow photographers and are interested in their work, they want to know what's happening behind the scenes. So you could conceivably do a trade book about the project that you used for the photo book. You could talk about the equipment you used and where you worked and your experiences in the field. They work in tandem. If you haven't done a trade book, you really should experiment. Number 3, magazines. Now, magazines are really cool for a variety of reasons. For some reason, the magazine has always held photographers completely spellbound, and the same is true today, going back to the beginning of the editorial world. going back to the beginning of things like Magnum Photo Agency, you know, Magnum was in the magazines. That's what people were after. It's still true today. A magazine is less formal than a book. It also signifies that your publication is what's called a serial publication, meaning there's more than one. So if you do a magazine issue in January, the reader assumes that there's going to be another one potentially in February or once a quarter, etc. Again, soft cover, 8.5 by 11, 2 really cool paper types. Again, if you haven't made a sample, I think the least expensive is a $5.99 magazine. Make a sample, do yourself a favor. Don't try to make it perfect, just get one and get it done. Okay, they are, I was just given word from Blurb Command Central that they are sharing you're sharing a link to the formats that should show up somewhere on your monitor. Notification in the top right and a catchy little sound that just happened. So take a look at that link and you'll get a little more info on formats. Okay, ebook, the crazy ebook. So ebook, obviously a digital version of a book. I want to give you a little separate piece of advice about ebooks. Ebooks, I run into typically 2 kinds of people: the people that go, I have no idea why I would make one, and then the second kind of person says, oh my God, I love ebooks, I use them all the time. So there's no right or wrong here, but what I like to look at, or how I like to look at ebooks, is as a companion to the print piece. Photographers historically have always worried about if they created a digital version of their book, would it cut into the print sales of a physical book? And I just do not see that as being an issue. I think you have print people and you have digital people, and print people want tangible objects. But I don't use my ebook as a replica of the print book. I use it as what I would call a movie trailer to the actual physical book. I don't just make a digital cloned copy. I try to give people an incentive to look at the ebook as a taste, as a movie trailer of what the physical book could be about. They're very easy to make. The Blurb software, your digital book is actually being made in the background as your physical book is being made. And they're also very cost effective. So they're a great companion piece to have. Okay, we're moving on to talking about layouts. Now, I could spend a month talking about layouts, design, etc. But I need to simplify for the sake that we are on a timeline here, and I don't have a month to talk to you. So I just want to give you a couple of words that that I think signify what I would call classic design, or design that will at least get you on the road to being successful. These are simple, clean, tight, and powerful. Now, you might say, obviously, you want simple, clean, tight, and powerful, but it's more difficult than you would imagine. And I have seen plenty of Blurb books that have come through the pipeline that are the polar opposite of these 4 words. So imagine turning the page of a book, let's say a photography book, and on a spread you see 25 different photographs. That typically is not the way to finding design bliss and success in your self-publishing life. If you go to the bookstore, let's say that you go online and you go to PhotoEye Books in Santa Fe, photoeye.com, and you look at the books, it's very rare that you're going to see a professionally designed, edited photo book from a traditional publisher that has 25 images on a spread. Typically, the work is given space to breathe. The layouts are simple, they're clean. The edit is very, very, very tight. You're not showing work you don't need to see, or you're not showing images that are too similar, and the work is dramatic and powerful. So I'm just going to give you a little quick sample of a book that I did recently. I grew up in Wyoming, and I went back when the solar eclipse happened to pass over the farm that I grew up on, the farm and ranch, and so I went back. What you're seeing here is the word glimpse, and the image of me is on the right hand. That's the cover of the book, and then the image bleeds onto the back cover. It's very simple. I've pulled the density of my image back so that the glimpse and the actual eclipse that you can see off to my right, and a very simple tagline at the bottom that says, a semi-autobiographical work of fiction, which was so catchy. How clever am I? But anyway, very simple, very clean. I didn't put 13 images on the cover. I didn't use 14 different fonts. I'm just trying to keep things simple and clean, because let's remember, the global attention span is getting shorter, not longer. So you have a very limited opportunity to put the hooks in people. And to do that, you need very simple, clean, and tight. This is from an internal spread of that book. And as you can see, 1 simple line of copy, 1 typeface, and a photograph that bleeds over both pages. That's basically, it's almost like line art, all black, all white, very graphic, simple, clean. This is an internal spread from the book. So I've got an image that runs over both pages called a double truck. And I've got a single small caption, at the bottom. I don't necessarily need that caption. And a lot of times people will come up to me and say, quote, well, I know I have to do captions, and my unquote. And my answer is always, or my question is someone going to come to your house and make you do that if you leave captions off? The truth is there are no you have to do this or that when you're making a book. It's what you want, what you can justify. One of the things you'll notice immediately is when this image first came up, so when I went from here to here, I can almost guarantee you that 100% of the eyeballs went immediately to that caption. So in essence, I'm actually taking your vision away from my image and forcing you to read text. And these are the kind of things, when you're talking about layouts and design, these are the small details that make a huge difference in how your book is consumed. So just because you look at a book and it has page numbers and captions doesn't mean that your book has to have page numbers and captions. It's only how you want it to feel. And is this caption, is the copy actually adding to the page, or is it distracting? Just a thought to keep in mind. These are some more internal pages, internal spreads. So these are both right and left-hand pages, each one. And as you'll see, I've sort of kept some consistencies to the copy, just a single image with copy over the top. And the reason the book was designed this way was that I was doing a spread every day, meaning a single image, and I was writing notes from my journal that I had written that day over the top of the image. So I wrote these words around the same time that I was making these photographs. I was just trying to keep things simple and clean. It is a lot of copy, but to me, this particular project, the copy was as important as the actual photographs. So again, clean and simple, single images, simple copy blocks. Here's another one just by itself, enlarged a little bit. Again, my goal on this project was to make a single photograph every day and then try to write something witty to go along with it. And some of them worked and some of them didn't, but that's life of a bookmaker. Okay. Any questions, or you want to move on to tools? Oh,
Yeah.
we have a question.
As for black and white images, do they come out without any tints these days? Is there any sort of protocol or workflow to get them printed in pure black and white with color?
Oh, it's the dreaded black and white color cast question. If I had $1 for every time someone asked this, I would be able to buy a mid-size American sedan. I'm pretty sure over the years. Not an exotic car, but a sedan. It's a great question. If you go back to the beginning of print-on-demand technology, or really digital printing in general, one of the hardest things to do for a digital printer was to print neutral black and white. Today, it is completely and utterly doable. I print it all the time. I can't remember the last time I had a color cast. There are certain things that you need to do to make sure that you're on this path. The first one is to calibrate your monitor. And I don't want to hear any excuses from anyone on this call as to why their monitor is not calibrated. You would be amazed how many people don't calibrate and how many pros don't calibrate, believe it or not. But here's the cool thing. The human eye is a remarkable machine, and the eye will adapt to things that you don't think are actually possible. So you could be sitting in front of a monitor that's 30-point cyan, and if you sit in front of it long enough, your eyes will actually take that cyan out and make you think it's neutral. So you've got to calibrate your monitor. It's not complicated. You can buy an inexpensive monitor from a company like X-Rite. It's a little spider that goes on your screen. So you want to calibrate. Now, you can also download an ICC profile from Blurb that is for the printers that are going to actually print the book. Sometimes I do this and sometimes I don't. And I don't do it. You'll be surprised why. I don't do it because I know that a lot of you are not doing it. So I don't want to view every single one of my publications and think, oh my God, I absolutely have to do this. You should do it, but you don't. And sometimes I do and don't, like I said. But do those two things. And the third thing I want to throw out is keep your monitor density in mind. And when I say density, I mean brightness. Most of us sit in front of a computer with the monitor turned all the way up. It's very difficult to print what you're going to see on a monitor at that level of brightness. So just keep those in mind and you will be golden and happy and your books will be neutral. And the hard part will be fighting off the hordes of fans that want to get your books. That's my guess. All right, we're going to move on to tools. Or we got another question.
Speaking of color, what color space do you recommend?
Color space. Well, Blurb is an sRGB print space. I know a lot of you are capturing in Adobe or Pro RGB. There's a million people are all over the board these days, but they're capturing in as large a color space as possible. But you're printing out of an sRGB printer, so you need at some point to do the conversion. The Blurb software will do it for you. Or if you are a little more tech inclined, you can make those conversions on your own. Again, I've printed every way possible. I've done conversions and I've done other times where I've just imported Adobe and the Blurb software does the conversion for me. And I frankly can't really tell a whole bunch of a difference, but If you're going to move forward in life as a photographer, if you're going to move forward as a professional, you definitely want to get your ducks in a row. It's a good idea to use the profile. It's a good idea to make your conversions. All right, we're going to move on to tools because you have multiple options as well, and they're all good, and it's going to take a little some exploratory missions. The first one I want to talk about is BookWrite, and this is sort of the holy grail of our software. It's free, downloadable, cross-platform. You download it, install it, open it, and attack. And Blurb BookWrite is actually a really good program. If you are a full-time designer, full-time book designer, and your life is spent in InDesign, I'll get to that in a minute. But for everyone else, BookWrite is a really good starting point. And even if you do have design chops, depending on the kind of publication you're making, BookWrite is really good. You can make books, magazines, ebooks, etc. It's clean, it's simple. Again, but here's the thing. I know there are some of you out there clinging to our old software, and it's time for you to let go. Really, just don't even think about the old software. BookWrite is better. Make the jump. If you sit down with it 2 or 3 times, you're going to be ready to rock on BookWrite. So don't be afraid of it. Number 2, a Blurb plus Adobe InDesign. So Adobe InDesign, for those of you who don't know, is really the industry standard for design programs. I was always terrified of InDesign because I'm not a designer, and I thought it's too complicated, I'll never be able to use it. And then lo and behold, Blurb made a plugin. What that means is you download the plugin from Blurb, and it automatically loads into your Adobe InDesign program. And it brings up a little window called a book creator. And what you do is you just tell it what you want, and it builds the documents for you. So you want an 8x10 photo book with 80 pages, and you know what paper you want, boom, and it fabricates both the document, the body document, and the cover, so that when you're building it, you know that the specs are exactly what they need to be. It is a wonderful thing. Every designer I know that uses Blurb uses that plugin. They love it. It's great. Trust me. Okay, we also have PDF to book. And this means if you already have an existing book PDF, you can go to Blurb and go to the PDF uploader, which I've been told is one of, if not the best PDF uploader out there. And you can upload your book directly to Blurb and have it printed. How slick, how cool is that? Now, Lightroom, I'm guessing that most of the people who are photo prone on this webinar are using Lightroom, including myself. And you'll notice in the book module in Lightroom that is a direct link to Blurb. So you can't make everything in there. You can't make trade books or magazines, but you can do the photo books. And it's a really slick process, especially if you're making something like a portfolio. And the great thing is you never have to leave the software. You can make adjustments on your images, and those same adjustments will show up in the book. It's awesome. I've used it a few times. I actually should use it a lot more because I'm in Lightroom all the time, but I'm kind of a slacker. All right, moving on to timeline, unless you want to hit me with another question.
Someone had a question about
We've got a question.
Lightroom.
Lightroom.
They said they just want to know more about Lightroom. It seems like it's falling behind. Is it better to just export to BookWrite?
Well, there's a question about Lightroom. And Lightroom is another Adobe program. It's basically become the industry standard for imaging. There are other options out there, but most of the people I know are still using Lightroom. And I think certain programs have gone away in the past 5 or 6 years, and I think a lot of people have found refuge in Lightroom. It's a great program. It's pretty simple to use. If I can use it, anyone can use it. And having the ability to go straight to book from Lightroom is a really advantageous tool. I also use other companies that attach to Lightroom as well. So it's pretty nice to be able to have my images attached to Lightroom, being able to manipulate them inside the software, and then going directly out to the book, all without leaving the Lightroom platform. Because software, to me, a good piece of software is about efficiency. I always say that if you don't get a hold of that of the technology will definitely get a hold of you. And if you're a photographer, the last thing in the world you want to do is spend your life in front of the screen. You want to be out in the field making new work. And to do that, you've got to be efficient. So you want programs like BookWrite, Lightroom, and InDesign. All right, we're going to talk about timeline now because everyone is in a hurry. Don't lie, you're all in a hurry. I know it. Okay, so if you're going to put a book into the world, the timeline is going to depend on multiple things, including it's going to depend on the book. So are you a first-time bookmaker? Are you a professional bookmaker? Are you making a book for yourself? Are you making a book for strangers? Are you making a book for a small audience that you have? Or are you making books for the entire world, selling to people that you don't know? So a timeline for print on demand, which is printing one book at a time. And let me just give you a little explanation here. So Blurb started back in 06, 07 as a print-on-demand publisher. And print-on-demand means that you can print a single copy of a book at a time. Now, that might seem like old hat at this point in time, but it's not. It hasn't really been around. It's only been around since 06, 07, basically. Making a single copy of a book is an incredibly powerful thing. You could literally make a book for a specific person. Let's say that you wanted to get on Oprah or something, and you were like, I'm making a book, and I'm going to make a book specifically for Oprah. You could do that. The great thing about print on demand, one, you're only making one copy, so if you make a mistake, obviously you can go back and redo it. Number two, it's very immediate. I can leave this webinar right now, grab a body of work, make a book, hit print, and in a week or 10 days, it's on my doorstep at home. That timeline is incredibly short, especially when you consider if you had to work through a traditional publisher, you're looking at typically between 12 and 18-month timeline for a book. That's crazy. I mean, 18 months, a lot of us, you know, we've got, just think of what happens in an 18-month time span. So print on demand is immediate. Now, a few years ago, Blurb started doing offset runs as well. We have this amazing department called Client Services, and Client Services, if you're someone who wants to do a book, let's say you need 500 copies or 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever, we have a division called Client Services, and these people literally walk you from day one to the end of the project. They are basically holding your hand the entire way. An offset book is using a traditional like 4-color offset press, and there are certain countries in the world, China, Italy, Iceland, etc., that specialize in offset printing, and Blurb works with international printers as well as domestic. And the great thing about doing an offset print run in terms of timeline, it's a much longer timeline. You're looking at a minimum of 12 weeks to do a book, because it literally, let's say your book is printed in Asia, the book is printed and put on a ship, a legitimate steel-hulled ship like we've seen in the movies that cross the great seas of the world, and they're literally shipped back to the United States. It's an incredibly long, slow process. However, the beauty of an offset run is that your cost per unit or your cost per book is much, much lower because you're committing to a much higher print run. So the smart photographer, the smart artist utilizes both of these at the same time. You can do an offset book, but you can also do a print on demand version of it as well. Did you have a question? Is there
something? No, I shared a link about Client Services.
Oh, there's a, Amber just told me that there is another link she shared at the top, a Client Services link. And I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about Client Services in the future. It's a really cool program, and the team of people is awesome. Oh, we are going to change the name. Okay, well, I'm going to keep that a secret. So, because I don't know, so how can I tell you the name if I don't know? I never know anything. But anyway, we're moving on here. Print on demand, very immediate, offset, lower cost per unit, but you're looking at a minimum of 12 weeks. So again, I'm telling you all this because I've had 18 million people come to me in a panic trying to get something done very quickly. Great bookmaking. If you really want to assure you're going to make something great, give yourself a little bit of time to so that you're not rushed. Okay, I think this is the last category that we're talking about here. We're going to talk about budgeting, and we're going to talk about stores. For some reason, everyone is still enamored with getting their books in the store, so I have a little bit of advice for you in that regard. Do we want to take any questions here, or we want to keep going? Oh, we're going to keep going. Okay. So when it comes to budget, the first thing I want to tell you is you've got to build the right book. Don't build the book that your ego tells you to build, and don't build the book that history tells you to build. The book that you have to build, if you're trying to get your book out into the world and sell to people that you don't know, you have to build the book that fits your audience. Is your audience willing to pay $120 a copy for your photography book? My guess is no. I don't think my mother would spend $120 on, well, she might, maybe my brother and sister. But I do have people that follow my work that have bought prints from me in the past that would pay $120 for a book. But if I'm making a book for an audience that I, let's say that I go out to my blog readership and say, what do you guys want? What are you looking for? Maybe they come back and say, look, I can only spend $20 on a book. Great. Then I make a Blurb trade book. I make something that fits that market and that audience. That's the best thing to keep in mind. And remember what I told you before about one of the reasons why Blurb works so well is that you're not stuck on a single format. You can make an expensive photography book, and you can make a trade book and a magazine to fit whatever audience you're going after. And let me give you some ingredients here as to what is going to determine making the best book and what's going to really impact your cost per unit. The first thing is trim size. There's a big difference between 7x7 and 12x12. I think every photographer, when we first get into photography, our mind is telling us and our ego and history is saying, I always have to have the largest book humanly possible, but that's not the case. So the 7x7 is a great book to start out with, and it's a lot less expensive than the 12x12, but the ultimate scenario is to use both. The second is paper type. And as you'll notice, you can order a swatch kit from Blurb. Blurb makes a bevy of different papers from very, very inexpensive to a little more pricey, fine art, high-end, archival art papers, et cetera, and everything in between. Your paper type is gonna significantly impact your cost per unit and the type of book that you're gonna make. So again, I would do some serious testing and experiments on paper types, and that way you'll see what your work looks like on these different papers, and you can sort of save those test books to utilize in the future every time you're gonna make a new book. The next thing is your page count. The page limit on a Blurb book is 440 pages, so it's ginormous. And yes, I have made a couple of books with that many pages just to see what they look like, and they actually look really cool. But your page count is going to determine have an impact on your cost per unit, and also your cover type. There's a big difference between a hardcover image wrap or a hardcover dust jacket and a soft cover. And if you go to the Blurb pricing page, you can see this very easily. You can select your cover type, your page count, et cetera, and it'll give you a price on what your cost per unit is going to be. So trim size, paper type, page count, cover type, quantity. Again, your print on demand, you can make a single book at a time. It may be $100, but you're only having to make one of them. Whereas if you do an offset run and you print 1,500 books, your cost per unit is going to be much, much, much lower, but you're again having to commit to having 1,500 books. And also customizations. So again, this is something I get questions about all the time. Photographers come to me, I want to do a debossed, foil stamped, embossed cover with a slipcase, and I want a ribbon, and I want printed end sheets, and I want like a glass case for it to come in, and a helicopter to deliver it to people. Customizations are amazing, and through client services at Blurb, you can do a variety of different customizations, and they do look fantastic, but they also definitely have an impact on your cost per unit. My advice is if you're going to do customizations on a book, I would think about doing things like two. I would think about like a foil stamped debossed cover and leave it at that, or a printed end sheet and a placeholder ribbon, these kind of things that are not over the top, that are not going to break your budget, but they add really nice elements to the book. Okay, again, we talked about this before, but I just wanted to drive it home one more time. POD, there's no upfront cost. You download the Blurb software. It's free. You make your book, and your first expense incurs when you are hitting pay for that book on the first copy and you're in the Blurb site. Offset, there is an upfront cost, but you have the ability to lower your cost per unit, et cetera. So again, print on demand, you're going to see POD. If you research printing online, you're going to see that abbreviation a lot, the POD. Okay, let's talk about getting a book in stores. I wish I could tell you that this was a simple procedure, but it's not. And as you can see over what's happened in the past 10 years with Amazon and independent bookstores and Barnes & Noble and things like that, there's been a lot of shifting in the marketplace, and things are changing all the time. Now, the flip side of this, and the great thing is that books and photography books and art books are as popular now as they ever have been. And there are more and more independent publishers, there's more and more independent bookstores, and there's more and more independent art bookstores out there. And each one they're like fingerprints. They're all unique, and each one is going to take a very specific sort of approach, but I want to give you some generals here. Okay, you've got to choose the right book to get it into the bookshop, and this is going to take some research on your part, which is visiting the bookshops. You could even talk to the book buyer at the store and see what kind of books they're interested in getting. But they may or may not look at your $120 photography book and say, this is a realistic book for us to sell, because remember, they are going to have to put a markup on that book to sell it. And so if your book comes in at 120 and then they have to put a markup on it, it's getting very expensive very quickly. So potentially a book like your trade book version of your book might be the better fit. All right, moving on, you have to show consistency. I would classify bookstores just like editors, just like publishers, just like agents, and people who are assigning work in the photography world, is they want to see that you can produce good results over time. So if you're a photographer and you got one out in the street and made a picture and got lucky, an editor may look at that and say, you know what, that's a great photo. Now go back in the field and prove to me that you can do it again. And bookstores are similar in this way. They like people that have a publishing track record, and that's someone who can say, these are the first 3 books that I've done, and that there is a quality level consistency to that work where they say, wow, this is a person who's serious about publishing, serious about making great work, serious about marketing, bringing things to the table, etc. Next is understanding the system and things like buybacks. So most of the time, bookstores don't want to accept your book without a discount, and sometimes that discount is upwards of 40%. So you have to, again, I know a lot of you are probably like recoiling in shock hearing that, but that's how things work. They want a discount up to 40% to put the book in the store. But remember, having a book in the store is a different strategic advantage than not having a book in the store. So even though you may be selling books at a store at a significant discount, the fact that you can drive customers to that store is a big deal. It adds legitimacy to who you are as a self-publisher to say, oh, by the way, we're walking down the street, there's an independent bookstore. Oh, by the way, they sell my book. Now, also these independent bookstores, if your books don't sell over a specific period of time, oftentimes they require you to buy the books back. So it's good to have a plan B for where those books would go if they don't sell in the bookstore. And by the way, don't get depressed or sort of held back by the idea that your books don't sell. Selling books is not easy. And if you look historically through the publishing world and the history of people putting books into print, some of the most successful books in the history of the world, I'm not joking, some of the most successful books initially did not sell at all. Some of them were turned down by 20, 30, 40 publishers who looked at the work and said, this will never sell. And then lo and behold, some publisher took a chance and said, I think this is gonna work, I believe in this, and boom, some of these books went on to become the highest sellers in the history of the world. So don't give up. Next, think about working with a book packager. A book packager is someone who is, I would classify as a go-between between an artist and an actual publisher or book publishers and bookstores. And what a packager can do is look at the work that you've created and help you refine how that work would most appeal to a publisher or a bookstore. They are phenomenal. These people, they don't get a lot of publicity, but they're incredibly strategic. And if you've got something that you think really has a commercial viable application, then working with a book publisher could be a good idea. Know your markets. I think one of the things that a bookstore is going to ask when you come in is what kind of following, what kind of market do you have? So that means going out to the people who are interested in your work and getting feedback from them about what they're willing to buy from you, how much they're willing to spend, and how frequently are they willing to do this. And this is a big difference than getting a like on social media. This is being able to go to them and say, these are people who have subscribed to my newsletter. These are people who have bought from me in the past. This is how many books I've sold in the past. This is how many I think I can sell of this. This is gold to anyone who's putting books into the world. And there's a great appreciation for someone who walks in off the street that has this kind of data for the bookstore to work with. And next, build an audience, and I mean a real audience. And that's going to come from a variety of different places. I'm a big fan of blogging. I've been blogging for a long, long time. I think longer than any of my friends, if I remember correctly. You hear a lot today, obviously, about social media. And I think things like newsletters, mailing lists, etc. The short answer, in my opinion, is that you've got to utilize all of these things. You've got to be smart, you've got to produce good work, and you have to be strategic about how you go into the market with it. So when I say use things like newsletters and social media and blogs, I don't mean you have to do this all day long, every day. I think the people who do it the best, number one, start with making great work. They make really good photographs, they make really good books. And two, when they go out to social media or their blog or their mailing list, they go when they really have something specific to say or add to the conversation. And if you do that, people have a real appreciation when they see your name pop up in their inbox or in their social media feed. They see you, they go, oh, he must have something or she must have something new and interesting, and I better pay attention. And there's been a couple of articles over the past few years that have been really great about something called a true friend. And I'm not sure, I should look up who was the one who coined that phrase. But a true friend is someone who is really opted in to become a follower of your work, and not only opted in as just a follower and someone who may comment from time to time, but someone who's willing to engage financially with what it is you're putting into the world. It could be buying a photograph from you or buying a book, etc. So build an audience, treat them with the highest respect, and the people who are really, following the power of your career and your work. All right. So that, I want to get to some case studies very quickly. Are we okay on time? These are some, okay, these are some samples I want to go through quickly. Caffeine and Concrete is a magazine based out of Sydney, Australia. And this is done by a guy named Lorenzo Princi, who is so smart and talented. And Lorenzo goes out and he interviews people and creates this magazine series. And he's done a lot of episodes, a lot of issues, and they're all so good. When he does, he basically turns the interview. He creates artwork that's based on the interview, and the artwork is made out of typography. So this whole drawing is made from type. And when you see these up close, they are remarkable. This is such a smart application for Blurb magazine. Lorenzo is a one-man band. He does everything by himself, editing, shooting, doing the audio recordings, everything. And he puts these together. They're super beautiful. It's a smart use of magazine. And he has literally, I don't know, probably 20-something issues at this point, which is really impressive. Even for me, I make stuff all the time, and Lorenzo is even more prolific, and his stuff is even, it's way more refined than what I'm making. This is a project I mentioned earlier. Ron Haviv is a very famous war photographer from the United States, and he did this project with us, or we worked together on this last year or 2 years ago. And this was about a body of lost film that he found, and we scanned and processed, and it was the work that was on this lost rolls of film. This is the book that you're looking at, and this is an 8x10 hardcover with Proline uncoated paper. This was printed in an offset run of 750 books, which was printed in Asia and then shipped back to the United States. But as you can see, here's a couple of images. We also did 2 magazines from the same body of work. We did an English version and a French version. Now, this is a very unlikely scenario with a traditional publisher. They're often never going to be able to print 3 different objects for you. But with a platform like Blurb, it's doable. So again, just keep this in mind that you're not married to a single format. I think this was just such a beautiful addition to this project. Magic City 1 and 2 was an art book collaboration between myself, another photographer in Florida, Andrew Kaufman, and Chloe Ferris, the designer in Sydney. And this is a little 5x8 trade book that is designed to be cut into pieces, actually. And again, these are inexpensive books. They look beautiful. We ended up taking, this was Magic City 1. We ended up doing a second version called Magic City 2. And the pages of Magic City 2 were all designed to be folded. As you can see, these creases in these pages are actually folds. This is 100% Chloe Ferris. She's an incredible designer, and she was the one that created this idea of folding pages to reveal a secondary design. And again, we're using a book here that's like a $10 book. It's not expensive, but how beautiful is this? This went on to be nominated, I believe, as Photo Book of the Year in Australia. So you can do a lot with a little book. Again, just another spread from that. And this is a little shameless plug. This is a magazine that I'm working on now. And I did not do this magazine to like show off my photography. I did this to show you guys how easy it is to do this. So this is an 8.5x11 magazine that's all based on the original Life magazine, which I was published in once in my career back in the day when Life was still around. And it was a highlight of my career because that magazine meant so much to so many people. And this is an 8.5x11 blurb, all done in Bookright, but I publish it in 2 sizes. I publish a magazine version at 8.5x11, and I publish a trade book version at 6x9. Same exact content, almost identical price point, but 2 very different viewing experiences. And I highly encourage you to do this. And it's all done through a 1-button push in Blurb Bookright. When I'm done creating the trade book version, the 6x9 version, I go into the software and I hit change format, and it fabricates the 8.5x11 version for me instantaneously. I do need to make minor tweaks on certain pages, but it works really, really well. Again, I highly encourage you to test that out. And again, this was like created because I wanted to show the photo essays that I was creating the way that I had envisioned them to be seen. And there really isn't a magazine left in the world, like a real magazine out in the real world, that would publish my work the way I want it to be published. So what I realized was I needed to do it on my own. And that's how this magazine started. As you can see, very basic, very simple. This is a story about the Grand Canyon. Very easy, but man, does it look good. And my final thought before we take a few questions and walk away today is a quote from Miles Davis. Sometimes you have to be able to play a long time to be able to play like yourself. And I think this is something that should stick in the back of your mind as you're moving forward in the bookmaking world, is that authenticity and originality are 2 of the hardest things to incorporate all the time, but they're absolutely essential. It's what separates the great people from the okay people in terms of artistic talent. And Miles, as we all know, was a genius. And I think a lot of times this reminds me of another quote from the Rolling Stones, where the Stones did their first album, and then Keith and Mick looked at each other and said, you know, we got to come up with our own stuff. Like, we can't play covers. We got to create our stuff. What eventually became, you know, the Rolling Stones. So take your time, try to create original work, have fun in the process, and good luck. We're going to take some couple questions, and then one more time.
The resources.
Okay, in the top right-hand corner, just want to remind you that there is a resources tab that you can click on that will show all of the different links that Amber and Esty sent out. And there are a bevy of them. Paper types, formats, etc. So don't neglect those links. Do we want to take a question or two?
Yeah,
Oh, and there's a handout in the bottom as well. Blurb monthly self-pub webinar one sheet that you can find in the lower right-hand corner. You can download that as well and take it away. I would definitely do that. Who doesn't love a cheat sheet? I mean, come on. I even made one. You can't see it, but I made myself a cheat sheet this morning. In the yellow? Oh, all of those. Okay, I'm going to take a few questions here. The first one is, what was your biggest obstacle to publishing your very first book? Okay, I'm going to answer this, but I'm going to also have to take you back in time, because the first book I did was in 1993. I'm assuming that there are people on this call that weren't even born in 1993. But I made my first book, and the first challenge I had was there was very little technology available. So to make this book, I was using a computer that was called a Macintosh Performa 630, and it only had enough RAM to make one page at a time. So just think about that. It was horrible, and I really had to want it to get the book done. So that was it. There were no desktop printers, so I didn't have any real way of like proofing this thing in a good way. So there were a lot of technological challenges. Next question.
What approach is best suited for a book of poetry?
What approach is best suited for a book of poetry? Well, you know, I'm gonna mix this up a little bit. I'm gonna tell you about a book I just read, which is not a book of poetry. I just read a book called The Hour of Land by Terry Tempest Williams. She's one of my favorite authors. And Terry Tempest Williams is a writer. She's not a photographer, not an artist per se. But she teamed up with Frisch Brandt and the Frankel Gallery here in San Francisco to choose images for the chapter heads in her book, which is about national parks. And it is such a great addition to the book. It just is a magical combination. So even though you're doing a book of poetry, I would not eliminate illustrations, meaning those could be drawings, those could be photographs, those could be pieces of art, whatever. And I would think about adding those in where appropriate, potentially chapter heads, or potentially at the beginning of certain poems, or maybe even at the beginning of the poetry book as well. I would also look at the trade formats, the 5/8, 6x9, and 8x10. And the cool thing about trade formats is if you get up to a size like 8x10, then you can suddenly add those illustrations at a really good size. So suddenly it becomes more of like an art poetry book than just a poetry book. That would be my advice. Any other questions?
Yeah, and just start doing the big ones.
And highlight it. Okay, so another question. Oh yeah, let me turn my camera on here so you guys can see me. Let me hide this. Let me do this. Let me do this. All right, I'm back here. Let me get some questions here. Can you make a living from self-published art books that feature only photography? Are photo-only books successful, or they also need text? And if so, what kind of text? You sneaky person, you got 3 questions in one. All right, I'm gonna go back and start with the first one here. Can you make a living from self-published art books? You might be able to. There could potentially be a handful of people in the entire world who are doing that. You can make money from self-published art books, but I would not want to put the pressure of trying to make my entire living from a self-published art book. I think then you're dangerously skirting the idea that you've got to make something that's palatable to a lot of people. So if you're an artist or a photographer, you've got to make your work, and there may or may not be a massive audience for that. And I wouldn't want to, again, put so much pressure on myself that's like, oh my God, I got to pay my mortgage with art book sales. Having said that, I was with a photographer about 6 months ago that sold over 1 million copies of his photography book. So, and I guarantee you that that came with a pretty serious advance and a pretty serious paycheck at the end of it. I would not classify it as a straight art book. It was a book about a specific person who was wildly popular at one time or another and popular worldwide. So again, he was building something that had a base of buyers, a base of readers out there that was sizable. Are photo-only books successful, or they also need text? No, photo-only books are successful, and they have been since the beginning of photo books. Text, however, depending on the kind of book that you're making, can be a really integral part of that. It can be a really important part of that. So don't rule out, I wouldn't draw a line in the sand, but yes, photo-only books are possible. All right, moving on to the next question. Let me see here. Ooh, this is a good one I like. With a mix of landscape and portrait format photos, how can these be arranged in a square format so as to not look messy? Ooh, very carefully. So I love this. I think a lot of times when people say to me, look, I'm a photographer, I shoot mostly landscape format or aspect ratio, and I need either the 8x10 or the 11x13. And I think that that's what I would call an expected marriage. That's taking aspect ratio landscape and forming it to a landscape aspect book. And that's great, fine and dandy, that works really well. Where things get interesting is when you take an aspect ratio photograph and you partner it with a different aspect ratio in print form. So meaning, let's say you take a portrait book and you fill it with landscape images. Again, I would keep to single images on a page. And for example, you could take a portrait book that's in this format, or this format, say, and you could literally just run your image across the top so it bleeds off on 3 sides and not 4. You could put a caption underneath it, you could put page number, etc. Just keeping it clean and consistent. So when the reader turns the page, there's not a surprise on every single spread, like, what is this person thinking and why is there 4 images on this one and black backgrounds on this page, etc. You want clean, consistent results. And I love square format books, I really do. I do shoot square format negative from time to time, which again is a pretty obvious pairing, but I also like them with landscape and vertical images as well. All right. This is another good question. Do buyers, publishers recognize self-published books as bona fide? I love that word, bona fide, by the way. Just the fact that we got that in the webinar makes me happy. It's going to be a good day. So the short answer is yes. I would say that for years, for decades, that was a reluctant acceptance of self-published books. But all of that is changing and changing in rapid fashion. I'm not going to name the book, but one of the highest selling books in the history of the world, which came out a few years ago, was self-published because 40+ publishers said, this is terrible, this will never sell, we don't want this, you have no background, you have no history. And the person self-published and it went on to become one of the highest selling books in history. So absolutely they are bona fide. And if you look at sales numbers online in the book world, there are a lot of self-published authors doing really, really well. Having said that, if you're a photographer specifically, photo book publishers are wonderful people and they do really wonderful things. It is complicated. They are very discerning. They just literally can't publish most of the work that comes in. The pipeline for publishing photo books is like this. And the amount of people coming in, you can't even see if I back up, the amount of people coming in wanting to get their books published is out here. And all the way down here, you have publishers and they're only capable of doing, most publishers are going to do 6, 8, 10, 12 books a year, maybe. And considering that every single person I know in the world is a photographer and we all want to do books, that's a hard thing. So self-publishing is becoming a very, very viable option. And there are people that do it so well. So keep listening to these webinars, follow our blog. We highlight these people a lot as well. Okay, more questions. I'm looking for a good one here. Just give me a second. Can I edit and change a book for subsequent copies after I have published it once? And the short answer is yes. So let's say that I publish an issue of my magazine this afternoon, and then my mother calls me tonight and says, you misspelled my name. I can go back, delete that from the Blurb bookstore, go back to my BookWrite file, change it, re-upload it, and I'm ready to rock on the second version. So that is one of the beauties of self-publishing through Blurb, is that you can go back and change or update. So like if you've done a portfolio of your best 20 images, and then all of a sudden tomorrow you make an amazing image, you can just go back, delete the file, go back to the BookWrite file, add the new image, and create a second portfolio. Okay, another one. Ooh, I like this question. This is someone who's wanting to publish a journal, and they want to know which kind of paper do you recommend that could be written on with fine liners. Yes, fine liners. Two papers that jump out at me, one in PhotoBook, one in TradeBook. The PhotoBook paper would be ProLine uncoated, which is one of the higher end art papers. It's an uncoated surface and it holds ink really well. It's got a little bit of tooth to it, but it's not super toothy like a watercolor paper, but it works well writing on it. And I've actually done this with a couple of workshops that I've given. And the paper in TradeBooks would be the standard color paper, which is an uncoated white-based paper. It's not super thick, so you're not going to want to use a really heavy ink pen. But if you've got something that puts down a light amount of ink, then it will work well as well. Okay, so that in a nutshell was our Getting Started webinar on self-publishing. I appreciate all of you joining us, and make sure that you communicate with us if there are topics that you want to see in the future, things that you liked, didn't like. If you didn't get your question answered, keep checking back. And we appreciate you being here, and we will be back in February with another webinar. And the super team, the Blurb super team will be here as well. Thanks again for joining us.